Well, since the war began on October the 7th, Israel's bombing campaign across Gaza has killed 8,005 Palestinians. That's according to the Health Ministry. 114 people have been killed in the occupied West Bank in nearly 3 weeks. And 2 Palestinian prisoners died in Israeli custody. Israel says that was due to natural causes. The Israeli government says more than 1,400 Israelis were killed in Hamas's attack 3 weeks ago. Let's bring in Kenneth Roth now. He's the former executive director of Human Rights Watch and a visiting professor at Princeton University. Joins us from New York. Welcome to the programme. So, put simply, how would you describe what's happening across Gaza at the moment?
Well, I think we very likely have war crimes being committed. We obviously had war crimes to start this all off, with Hamas slaughtering Israeli civilians and abducting them and firing weapons indiscriminately into civilian populated areas. But we know that under international humanitarian law, war crimes by one side do not justify war crimes by the other. Each side has an independent obligation to respect the laws of war. And we see Israel violating them. I think most recently, if we look at what's happening with Al-Quds Hospital, even if there is some Hamas facility underneath, and we don't even know that. You know, Israel made a similar allegation regarding Al-Shifa, which Hamas denied. But when you have 14,000 people in the hospital, many in critical situations where they can't be moved, an evacuation order doesn't suffice. And it's wrong to suggest that, you know, whatever military advantage comes from hitting the supposed Hamas facility underneath would justify the wholly disproportionate harm to civilians. So that's an example of violating the rule against disproportionate attacks that harm the civilian population. You know, we similarly are seeing indiscriminate attacks, entire neighborhoods being flattened. And, you know, Karim Khan was just in Egypt on the Gaza border. He's the International Criminal Court prosecutor. What's interesting, he's been pretty much AWOL until now, but suddenly he's revived. And he says blocking aid, in essence, is a war crime. He didn't put it in explicitly those terms, but he essentially is saying, I've got an active investigation. It violates humanitarian law not to allow aid to the civilian population. And he's basically threatening Israel with war crimes charges, as he reiterated that Hamas's actions were war crimes. So there has been some movement now in terms of finally the International Criminal Court made clear that there might be some accountability for this complete flouting of international humanitarian law by both sides.
As you alluded to there, how important is it to note that the rules of law here are non-reciprocal, meaning they apply irrespective of what each side may have done?
Well, that's essential because, I mean, if you just think about in any war, there are passions on both sides. You know, in day one, typically one side is accusing the other of war crimes. Now, you know, in this case, we know war crimes did launch this latest exchange on October 7th. What Hamas did was, you know, blatant war crimes. But that's not the end of the matter. You know, if that were enough to then justify Israeli war crimes, you would have no laws of war, no humanitarian law in virtually any conflict. So these are non-reciprocal obligations. They're absolute obligations on each party. So it's not enough for Israel to say, oh, we have a right to defend ourselves. You know, we have a right to respond to Hamas. Sure, but that does not mean a right to ignore international humanitarian law. And, you know, Biden, to his credit, said that today after his conversation with Netanyahu. He didn't go so far as to say, and you're violating those laws. But, you know, you could read between the lines that clearly is happening. But it was good to see Biden conditioning his, you know, traditional statement, Israel has a right to respond, a right to defend itself, with an absolute requirement that that defense be in compliance with humanitarian law, which, of course, it has not been.
Given what you say, then, how important is it to document events for the future, however difficult that might be during a conflict situation?
It's essential to do that. But, you know, there are always incidents that stand out. I mean, the blocking of humanitarian aid isn't a complicated thing to document. Everybody can see that. You know, going back in time, the settlements in the West Bank are violations of the laws of war. They violate Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which say that an occupying power cannot transfer its population to occupied territory. So that's a simple war crime. If you look at the bombing, I mean, I was struck the other day when I learned that Israel had bombed the Islamic University of Gaza ostensibly because it was training Hamas intelligence operators. By that logic, my university, Princeton, could be bombed because some of the students go on to work at the CIA. I mean, that's crazy. That's not what the laws of war require. So I think that while, clearly we want to document as much as we can, it sometimes is difficult in the exchanges of war to look at every single case. But certain ones stand out where there just is no justification. And those are situations where the International Criminal Court prosecutor clearly should be concentrating his attention and moving as expeditiously as possible to issue war crimes charges. Because once that happens, once people realize that there are criminal consequences to this conduct, it's more likely to stop.
Kenneth Roth, thank you very much indeed for your insights here on Al Jazeera today.
Thank you for having me.